I played Madden 23's franchise mode early, and I'm going to tell you every single thing you need to know about it. As many of you know, the Madden 23 beta has been out for a couple of weeks now, and they finally added franchise mode to the beta, so people have been playing it all day long. And speaking of the beta, I did get a couple extra codes to give away because they extended it to the 27th, so my social media accounts are up on the screen. After the video, you can go follow. I'll be giving some away later tonight. So let's start with some of the changes for franchise mode this year. Now, we've talked about them briefly on the channel, but now I know much more about them after playing it all day long. We have player motivations and player tags, which are two big driving forces behind team building in franchise mode this year that's going to make it a lot harder to sign players, a lot harder to keep players happy, and it's going to definitely help with the AI determining where they actually prefer to play instead of you just being able to sign anybody. This also plays into the biggest overhaul this year, which is the free agency period of the game. It's much different than in the years past, and they've kind of brought it back to how it was, maybe more so in its glory days where it wasn't as easy to sign everybody and it was a little bit more of a bidding war. There's also some new accessories and equipment things to go over. There's also some updates to scouting that are pretty important, but really quickly, if you don't want to miss out on any of the upcoming Madden 23 news up until the game drops, make sure to subscribe and turn the bell icon on so you don't miss any of these important videos when they go live. We're on the road to 500K, and if everybody watching just subscribed, we would hit that number today. So let's start with player motivations. One of the biggest things about the mode as a whole this year, this really drives where players want to sign, if you can re-sign them, or if you can sign them in free agency, and this also kind of affects the trade market a little bit as well. So here are some of the motivations for players. You have Super Bowl chase, which basically means it's a player that wants to be on a contending team, but there's different tiers of contending teams because some teams are considered league favorites to win it all, the top few teams in the league, and then you have other teams that are considered playoff contenders. Now, if you're a league favorite and the player that you want to re-sign or you want to sign in free agency has the Super Bowl chase motivation, a league favorite's going to have a little bit more of an edge over a playoff contender, and then if you're an underdog, this is going to be an area where you do not have any advantage. Another motivation is historic championships, which I guess is more of a prestige type of thing for a franchise, so you think maybe the Steelers or the Patriots, teams that have won a lot of Super Bowls and have a lot of winning in their history. Some players want to play for that type of a franchise. You have no income tax, which basically means that if they sign to a team that's in a state with no income tax, they're going to get to keep more of their money. So players that have more of the money on their mind, they're going to probably have the no income tax motivation. You also have the close to home motivation, which just means they want to play close to home, but this one's a little bit more in depth. So let's say I'm the Saints. If someone's from Louisiana, well, that motivation is going to be completely maxed out green. But let's say the player's from Mississippi or Alabama. It's still going to be in the green because it is still technically close to home, but it's not going to be fully maxed out. Now let's say that player's from Florida. Now it's going to be more in the neutral because again, it's not too far from home, but it's not super close either. But if that player's from California or way up north, then it's going to be completely in the red because it's really far away from home. Another motivation is big market, which a lot of players have, and this is pretty much self-explanatory. Some people want to play in those big market cities, and if you're not one of them, there's a lot less chance of you being able to re-sign or sign that player. There's top of the depth chart, which is basically what it sounds like. It's a person that wants to be at the top of the depth chart at that position. He definitely wants to be a starter. That's going to weigh into his decision. There's also a scheme fit motivation where players want to sign with a team that fits their play style, that fits what they're best at. There's a highest offer motivation, which just goes back to money. Some people just want to go where they're going to get the highest offer, and that's all they care about. There's another motivation where players want a franchise quarterback. Now, you see this more with wide receivers, obviously, but even some of the other players will have this as well because franchise QBs are kind of linked to winning more times than not. So you're going to see it more with receivers, but you will see it with some other players as well. Another motivation is head coach historic record. So some people want to play for a coach that's won a lot, like a Mike Tomlin. He has a high winning percentage over his career. The player's going to feel better on a team that has a coach that is known for winning. There's also a motivation called a warm weather state, which is what it sounds like. Some teams want to play where the climate's a little bit warmer. And there's also a motivation where some players prefer a mentor at the position that they play, which this goes into player tags, which I'll get into in a second. But basically, I've seen this with a lot of the younger players. If it's a younger QB or a younger wide receiver, some of them would like to play for a team that has a mentor at that position because the mentor helps those players progress a little bit faster. Now, another aspect about about the player motivations to keep in mind is every single player has 3 motivations, and the top motivation is the most important. And what I noticed when trying to sign free agents or when trying to re-sign players, if the top motivation is in the green, meaning you have exactly what they want, the second and third motivation can be in the middle or can even be in the red, and you still have a decent chance at signing that player because you have the thing he's interested in the most. Whereas if the thing he's interested in the most you don't have, if that's in the red and the other 2 things are in the green, it's still going to be hard to sign them because the top thing that they're looking for you don't have. Now, another thing to keep in mind as well is if you have everything that they want, you might be able to get that player with a lesser deal, which is something else we're going to talk about later in the video, how they redid the contract structures. But if they have everything that you want, you might be able to get them for a team-friendly deal. Whereas if you don't have everything they want and they're not really having a high interest in re-signing to you, some of those players you can still win over by just completely overpaying for them. But there's even other times where overpaying just won't get it done. They just do not want to sign with you. So there is a little bit of nuance to it and a little bit of wiggle room depending on the type of contracts you will give these guys. Now that you kind of understand the motivations, let's jump to the player tags. Now, how this is different is that not every player has a tag, but every player has motivations. Now, some of the player tags are as follows. You have Mentor, which we just spoke about briefly. This is something you'll see some of the higher end veteran players tend to have, but sometimes it could be a lower end guy that's just been in the league for a while. He could have this as well. And basically, if someone's a mentor, it's going to mean that more teams are going to be interested in signing that player, and also that this player will raise the XP for the position group. So somebody that had this was Julio Jones, for example, so he will raise the XP bonuses in the weekly training for wide receivers. You also have the award winner tag, which just basically means someone that's won an MVP or a rookie of the year or something like that. More teams will be interested in that type of a player. You have bridge QB, which means that he is a starter, but the team will look to draft their replacement. He's not a long-term solution. You also have bridge player, which is similar, but it's just outside of the QB position where future starters will be placed ahead of them on the depth chart if they're considered a bridge player. So if you sign a rookie running back and you kind of have an older bridge player at running back, your rookie running back might be 2 or 3 overall lower, but he still may start over him because you drafted him to be kind of the future, and the guy you have there now is just a bridge player. He's nothing special anyway. You have day one starter, which is a player that you draft to obviously start right out of the gate. He will be placed above similarly rated players on the depth chart, and the team will be less likely to draft their replacement. So you could draft a rookie cornerback, and he might be 2 overall points lower than the guy that is already on the team, but since you drafted this guy to be a day one starter out the gate, he will go ahead of him on the depth chart. Now, you also have a future starter tag, which is a little bit different than the day one starter. This is a guy that will be replaced above similarly rated bridge players on the depth chart, not players in general, but if it's a bridge player and you drafted a future starter, he's going to likely be placed ahead of him because you rather get him the reps, since the guy that's rated a couple of points higher isn't a guy that you see as a long-term solution anyway. And this guy will also get more XP for his weekly training because he has the future starter tag. It's a guy that you expect to progress a little bit quicker than just a regular player. You have QB of the future, which is kind of similar to some of these previous ones. He will be placed above similarly rated players on the depth chart if you think that he is your future franchise QB, but he's just not quite there yet, and the team will be less likely to draft his replacement because you see him as the guy that's going to be the future of the team. Now, you have the franchise QB tag as well, which is the guy that is already the franchise QB. He will not be replaced on the team until later in their career. So these are kind of important because, as we've seen in the past, a lot of times CPU teams will draft QBs when they already have a franchise QB, or they just drafted a guy that is likely going to be their future franchise QB. You won't really see that happen now because as long as the players have the correct tags, the teams are not going to be looking to replace them until they just fall out of that tag and they are no longer the franchise quarterback. And lastly, you have a trade target tag, which basically just means a guy that is considered a trade target, and a lot of teams will be making you offers on the trade block for this player if he has this tag. You can put players on the trade block, which will give them the trade target tag, and you'll be offered tons of different trades every week. But the one thing about this that I did notice is that the trades didn't really seem to be the greatest that the CPU offered. They kind of seemed to not really be the correct value of the player that had the trade target tag, but maybe that's something that could be better in the final version of the game. It just definitely looked like it needed some tweaking. Now, everything I've talked about so far comes together for the biggest change overall in Madden 23's franchise mode, and that is the free agency period. This is changing how you operate in the offseason when trying to sign these big players. Between motivations and tags, it's making it a lot tougher, and it creates more of a bidding war. But another aspect of this is in some of the earlier stages of free agency, you can only put out so many offers, so you might not want to waste your time trying to convince a guy that doesn't have high interest in your team, because you don't want to pass up potentially getting other offers out there to guys that you can sign to your team. I guess this is EA's way of trying to gamify the bidding war and the tough part of free agency, where no team is just signing every great player, all of the big players. No team is getting every player they want, so you have to be more strategic in who you're offering contracts to. It creates more of a bidding war similar to like a NCAA 14 scouting system in a way, if you can remember that, if you've played that game. So it does make free agency a whole lot better. Now let's move on to the contracts. So they did redo the contracts, and this kind of plays into the new player motivations and stuff like that. You have 4 different contract templates, but you can also do custom contracts as well, so you can tweak them a little bit to your liking. It'll show you each different contract is a different likelihood of signing whatever player this is. If you try to do a team-friendly contract right off the bat, it's going to show that it's in the red, because a lot of players don't want to take team-friendly deals. So the positive of this is that you save cap room, but the negative is you're a lot less likely to re-sign this player. And I noticed that the team-friendly deal typically only worked if it was maybe an older player who all of his motivations were in line with your team. If everything was in the green and his interest is super high and he was a little bit older, they were more likely to take that team-friendly deal. Whereas if it's a player that you're not meeting all their motivations, they're definitely not going to take that team-friendly deal. Then you have a neutral deal, which is basically what it sounds like. You have kind of a neutral chance of re-signing this person. The plus of this is that it is kind of a league average salary for that position, but the negative is that the player is not super likely to re-sign. It's kind of in the middle. And again, if you're meeting all of their motivations, they're much more likely to take this deal. Then you have the player-friendly offer, which definitely puts you in the green. They're much more likely to accept the offer, but you're probably just maybe slightly overpaying. They might be willing to take a little bit less, and that's where you could go in and kind of tweak some of the money or the bonuses and make it a custom deal. And then lastly, you've got very player-friendly, which is basically not many people are gonna turn this down unless the motivations are just completely not in line at all. If the interest is just completely in the red, they're probably not gonna take this. And the negative of this is if they do take it, you're way overpaying. But it might just be a certain player that you super want on your team and you're willing to give them that deal. But keep in mind, some players that are not in line with what your team has, even if you try to offer them the absolute max, they still might turn you down, which I think really makes it interesting. It's the first time in many years on franchise mode where you really just can't sign everybody you want, because some players just are not going to sign with you no matter what you give them. Or, you know, there are some players you can kind of finesse with that money, but your cap hit is going to take a huge hit because of it. Now, moving on to scouting, it's mostly the same, but they did improve it from where it was last year. It looks like they give you a little bit more info and they streamlined the important info a little bit better. But the main change is that you now find out all of the relevant traits or skills for that player's position. So for a quarterback, you know, if you scout him at least halfway or better, you're going to know pretty much everything you need to know about his accuracies and his throw power. If it's a receiver, you're going to know about his route running and his catching. If it's a cornerback, you're going to know about his coverage and his press and his tackling. Whereas last year, you would find out stuff about a quarterback like his break tackle, just things that you really didn't need to know. So they definitely did fix that stuff with the scouting. Now, in terms of equipment, I saw a few things that might be of interest to people. It looks like you can untuck jerseys now or something like that. There's 2 different jersey styles. The towel placement, as we've talked about in previous videos, you can move the towels around, but the hand warmers, you can still only put those in front. They've added different sleeve types to the jerseys now, so you can have the tight sleeves, you can have the baggy sleeves, and then you can kind of have like kind of a middle, kind of a little baggy, but not too baggy. You know, the different sleeve types that players wear in the NFL. You know, some quarterbacks tend to wear them a little more baggy. And they did change the practice jerseys around finally. The QBs have their separate jerseys in practice, so sometimes they'll wear the red jersey, 23, or Tom Brady, for example, he'll wear the creamsicle Bucks jersey in practice. Some of the practice teams don't have the last names on the uniforms because they don't wear those in practice, so they've kind of changed that up a little bit as well, just some little cosmetic stuff. But overall, it is franchise mode as it was last year, with just better team building, better free agency, players that can kind of decide where they want to go, some better contract options, and a better scouting system. So definitely a step up from last year's franchise. It didn't go backwards in any way, which I think is a plus nowadays when talking about Madden. But let me know how you feel about any of this if you've played it, and check out this video right here on the screen where I talk in depth about Madden 23's gameplay.